In the next few hours, Louise Woodward will begin her journey home. The Supreme Court in Massachusetts has upheld the decision that her conviction for the murder of baby Matthew Eapen should be reduced to manslaughter. A jury originally found Woodward guilty of second-degree murder last October, but the trial judge, Hiller Zobel, set aside that conviction and instead found her guilty of manslaughter. He ruled that she should be sentenced to 279 days in prison, the time she had already been held in jail. Since then, she has not been allowed to leave the United States while the court considered the prosecution's appeal against the decision. Although now free, she remains convicted of manslaughter. Our correspondent Philippa Thomas is outside the courthouse in Boston.
The ruling released by the judges here at the Supreme Court just 3 hours ago means the end of a nightmare for the Woodward family. By the narrowest of majorities, the judges have decided that the conviction of manslaughter, together with the sentence imposed, shall stand.
It's here.
It's here. It is here.
Pandemonium broke out in the courthouse as the Supreme Court clerk came out with the documents everyone had awaited for months. In nearby Marblehead, Louise Woodward's father, Gary, started celebrating, only hours after he'd spoken to us about the unbearable strain on his family. Across town, the parents of baby Matthew Eapen chose not to speak to reporters. So finally, this judgment brings to a close the roller coaster saga that's captured world attention and made Louise Woodward a household name. First came the verdict last October. Murder in the second degree and life in jail.
Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
Guilty of what?
Guilty of murder in the second degree.
Then the demonstrations which led swiftly to her release after 279 days in prison. Judge Hiller Zobel ruled that she had not been guilty of premeditated, cold-blooded murder, a ruling upheld by the Supreme Court today. Louise is now free to go home with her father, who spoke to me only last night about the way the family has held together.
Sue, over the past 15, 16 months, has shown unstinting loyalty to Louise. She lived in the USA for 7 months. She visited Louise in prison every day, under the most stressful conditions, without a thought for her own welfare. She gave up her friends, family and job to be near Louise and to give Louise the support that she needed. As a mother, she is second to none. In my opinion, she is the most amazing woman I have ever known.
Within the next 2 hours, we expect to hear a full reaction from both sets of lawyers. The prosecution, whose bid to put her back behind bars has failed, and the defence team, who secured her freedom. Philippa Thomas, BBC News, Boston.
Well, news of Louise Woodward's imminent release was received with relief and joy at her home village of Elton in Cheshire. As friends and supporters arrived to pass on their good wishes to the au pair's mother, Sue, she said she felt absolutely fantastic about the ruling.
Within minutes of the news from Boston, friends of the Woodward family and fundraisers from the village were arriving at the family home. Sue Woodward was almost permanently on the telephone, seeking more details of the court judgment. The whole village was taking time to absorb the decision, and those responsible for collecting money for Louise's defence urged people to consider everyone involved.
I think it's a time to actually, to actually think over, some of the emotions that must be going through all of the people who have been involved in the case, and certainly not to forget the emotions that must be going through the Eapens at this time as well.
Some villagers are already preparing for the homecoming.
Just brilliant. After so long we've waited and waited and waited, and we just knew that it was going to pop up one day like this, but we just didn't know when,
It was the result that I expected. It was a shame that it wasn't a better result, but I'm sure she'll clear her name when she gets back. I just broke down in tears. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. But now I think we should just leave her to get back to normal.
Once again, the Cheshire village of Elton is now under sharp focus. The Woodward home is virtually under siege as the world's media waits to share the family's reaction to the decision. Behind her closed doors and windows, Sue Woodward has been considering the implications of Louise's imminent freedom to come home. So far, her only reaction has been to call it absolutely brilliant. But others here in the village say that the campaigning to prove Louise's innocence will continue. John Thorne, BBC News, Elton.
Joining us now is our correspondent, Philippa Thomas, in Boston. Philippa, has there been any indication from the Supreme Court as to whether Louise Woodward can sell her story to the media?
3 of the 7 judges felt very strongly about this issue. They issued a minority opinion in which they said they felt she should be prohibited from selling her story in any way, from making any profit. But of course they were overruled. The majority verdict does not have that rider attached to it. So in a way what we have is a moral direction being given here by several of the judges, an earnest wish that Louise Woodward would not profit from this tragedy, as she said she doesn't wish to do in the past. But I don't think it's any legal sanction.
Right, but importantly, the majority of the judges did not back that particular warning.
That's right. The majority of judges said, we don't want resentencing, we don't want these riders attached. We believe that Judge Hiller-Zobel's verdict stands and that she should be free to go home. She is, after all, a convicted killer.
So is there any indication now that Louise Woodward might be preparing to sell her story?
There's always been speculation about whether or not she will, rumours about the tabloid newspapers, about who she's going to give interviews to, nothing that can be confirmed. All we have really is her words on the record from the time that she was released at the end of last year, when she said, I have no intention of profiteering from this tragedy. I have no intention of selling my story. And as recently as last week, her lawyers told me she has not been contemplating selling her story. So that's the official line as it stands, but obviously there's a lot of interest in what Louise does next.
And a lot of pressure from the media, presumably.
I think everybody wants to hear what she says. I think her problem may be she wants to go home now to see her mother Sue and her sister Vicky and be reunited with everyone back in Elton. And of course there's intense interest from the world and the media. So it'll be interesting to see whether she disappears or gets away from us all, at least for a while.
Philippa, thanks very much indeed. That's the position in the United States. It is, of course, a rather different story here in the United Kingdom, and our media correspondent Nick Hyam joins me to explain that. Nick, a clear warning this afternoon from the chairman of the Press Complaints Commission, Lord Wakeham, about the media paying Louise Woodward for her story, should she be so inclined to offer it.
Yes, that's right. The newspapers operate to a code of practice which rules out payment of any money for their story to convicted criminals or to friends, relatives, associates of convicted criminals, unless there is a very substantial public interest in its publication, and payment is the only way to secure publication. Now, Lord Wakeham has reminded the newspapers of that, and will clearly expect them to keep to that ruling.
Are there any indications that some newspapers might be preparing to argue that there is a public interest in the publication of the story?
There is an enormous amount of interest, as Philippa was saying, from all the newspapers in Louise's story. Most of the papers, all of the papers probably, would dearly love to have an exclusive interview with her. They are all aware, however, of this. The situation here is slightly different to the most recent example we had of a row over this issue of payments to criminals, and that was in the case of the Saudi nurses, because there the newspapers, the Mail and the Mirror and the Express, which paid the nurses for their story, argued that their conviction in the Saudi courts was very questionable. The Saudi legal system was not something we were at all clear about. It was definitely in the public interest for their story to be told. That issue is one that the Press Complaints Commission is considering even now. The case here is rather different because, of course, the American courts and the American legal system are very different to the Saudi system, much closer to the one we have here.
Nick, thanks very much.